Hello and welcome to this revision video which covers the topic of sunk costs. Barriers to market contestability exist when there are sunk costs, and these are costs that have been committed by a business and cannot be recovered if the firm has entered the industry, and can't be recovered if the firm then decides to leave the market. The really important point is that when sunk costs are high, then a market becomes less contestable. Indeed, what we say is that sunk costs act as a barrier to the entry of new firms, because what they do is they increase the risk factor that if you make a loss and you decide to leave the market, you can't claim back many of the expenses that you've put up front. So when sunk costs are high, the market is less contestable. However, when the sunk costs are low or pretty much non-existent, then market contestability is high. And the classic examples here would be if you think of a big city, lots of fast food restaurants and pop-up shops, sandwich bars, hairdressing salons, etc. In these kind of markets, there are many firms operating, partly because the sunk costs are barely significant at all. So what are some examples of sunk costs? Well, one, if a firm decides to leave the market, it may have to write off the value of the specific plant and equipment and the machinery that it has, and that can be quite a significant financial cost to bear. There may also be some closure or some project cancellation costs. So, for example, as a rule of thumb, if you're making workers redundant and they've been with you a length of time, you have to pay them about 1 month's redundancy for every year they've worked. So that can be quite a significant cost for businesses. There are costs associated with bad debts and having to pay off the remainder of contracts that you might have with, for example, suppliers of leased equipment. Fundamentally, of course, if you leave a market, the big risk is that you lose reputation and you lose the goodwill of your customers, particularly those who have bought a product off you and then rely on you for things like replacement parts and after-sales service. Business goodwill is hard to build, but it's easy to lose, and this is quite a significant point. Now, in some cases, a market downturn may only be perceived as being a temporary or a cyclical thing, and therefore businesses may choose to stay in the market because they expect economic market conditions to improve. So this graphic just summarizes for you 3 important sunk costs. There are exit costs associated with deciding to leave a market. You might have to write off the value of assets. There's the cost of lost consumer goodwill. And crucially, if you have to make people redundant, there will be a financial cost involved as well there. Here's an example of an industry where there are many firms competing, and the industry is constantly changing, in part because the sunk costs are pretty low. So you can see from the graphic on the left-hand side that Costa is Britain's biggest coffee chain, and that's reinforced by the data on the right-hand side, which shows how many outlets it has. But this is a very contestable market. Costa is competing with Starbucks and Caffè Nero, and the coffee provided by the likes of Waitrose and McDonald's, Coffee Republic. And then you have some smaller operators such as AMT Coffee, which typically operates in railway stations. So this is a very competitive market. These are the locations of Costa coffee stores in London. If they decide to close a store, perhaps they've had a short-run lease, for example, there will be some costs. There will be some sunk costs in doing so. But for a business such as Costa, it's unlikely to be significant. So these are some examples for you of sunk costs. Costs that cannot be recovered if a firm decides to leave a market.